After impressing viewers in the first and second Democratic debates, 2020 presidential candidate Marianne Williamson missed qualifying for the debate this month, but that hasn't stopped her repeated call for a moral and spiritual awakening in this country. And despite being absent from the debate stage, Williamson's showing in the latest Monmouth poll reflects some strong staying power. She is polling in sixth place among prospective voters, right behind Senator Kamala Harris. So joining us for more on the continued battle for the Democratic nomination is the woman herself and author of the new book, A Politics of Love, a handbook for a new American revolution, Marianne Williamson. Marianne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you. How's the campaign going? What's it been like? What's the update out there?
It's an extraordinary experience. It's like none other.
Yeah?
There are two different political universes. One is television and polls and pundits and money and all of that. And then the other is actually talking to voters. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different experience. And the American people are on high alert in their listening. Very impressive, the voters in the primary states who know that they have a lot of power on their hands making this decision. Yeah. And that part is exhilarating and really very moving. Yeah, very exciting stuff, too. You mentioned money. We've gotten some updates from other candidates so far about how they've been fundraising in the third quarter. Not everybody's yet. How have things been out there for you? We made about $3 million. Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's so obscene the way the part that money plays on our political system. Mm-hmm. Most of us live in a universe where $3 million is like a big deal. Right. In presidential fundraising, it's like, oh, she just squeaked by. Right. But, $3 million definitely says there are a lot of people out there saying, you stay and you keep going. Yeah. And I appreciate that so much.
So then we're not going to be hearing any news soon that you've decided to suspend your campaign?
Oh, no. As long as people are showing up at my events, telling me, showing up at, I'm in the oddest places. It could be on an airplane, in an airport, walking down the street. People say, you stay in there. People, it's amazing. And as long as they're sending the money to Marianne2020.com, yeah. I'm in there. Well, it's the American people who should be making this decision, right. Not the gatekeepers.
There's a lot of reasons out there right now among Democrats to continue the fight, too, because we've seen a lot of your guys' candidates out there right now talking about impeachment and talking about impeaching President Donald Trump right now. And in the wake of that whistleblower complaint over his call with the president of Ukraine, the president spoke earlier today about having both Ukraine and China investigate Joe Biden's relationship and his son's relationship with Ukraine. I want to play what he said to reporters earlier today and then get your reaction. So take a listen to this.
China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine.
So, Marianne, you just listened to that. What's your take?
I don't even know what he's talking about when he said what happened in China. I understand the Ukraine conversation about Biden. And what is he even talking about?
I think he was talking about the fact that his son had traveled with the vice president to China and kind of that relationship there. We've talked about business dealings in the country.
I think it's clear to most people that the president is dissembling. The president is seeking to distract us. The president is having a little bit of difficult time. So he'll say, this is a president who, as we know, will pretty much say anything to get us off the track of what really matters.
Are you on the same page, though, when it comes to impeachment with everyone else?
Well, it took me a while because I understand that we have to balance. Do I believe the president has committed impeachable offenses? I absolutely do. But the political realities are such that it wasn't until very recently, last week instead, that I actually put out a statement saying that I support the inquiry for that reason. It's gone too far. We have to do our own constitutional duties, not only people in the legislature, but we as citizens. Mm-hmm. There has to be a point at which we all hold accountable any lawless elected official, including the President of the United States.
So I want to dive into some of your proposals, particularly on the economy. So you talk about closing the wealth gap, and you have a lot of proposals on how to necessarily do that. So I want to first go to universal health care. You said you prefer a Medicare for all type plan. I'm wondering specifically what universal health care would look like to you. Do you support Bernie Sanders' plan of Medicare for for all. Is that the plan that you're throwing your weight behind, or do you have a different type of vision?
You know, it's very similar, actually, to the impeachment question. Do I support his plan intellectually? Yes, I do. However, the political realities, the personal realities of so many millions of Americans are such that I do believe we should start with a public option in addition to Obamacare.
And how would you fund it? Actually, I'm curious to know how you would fund most of your proposals and policies. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, for example, they come out and they say that they actually want to increase taxes on the rich. They want to put extra taxes on Wall Street. I'm wondering how you want to fund a lot of the plans that you have for criminal justice reform, the Institute for Peace that I know you want to create. How exactly do you envision paying for all of that?
Well, let's look at the semantics there. If you repeal the 2017 tax cut, the 2017 $2 trillion tax cut that gave 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest in the various corporations, to repeal that tax cut is not putting a higher tax on the rich. It's just stopping this ridiculous slide by which we have made this huge transfer of wealth over the last 40 years into the hands of a very few Americans, to the point where 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. I would repeal that tax cut, although I would put back in the middle class tax cut because I think that's a good idea and should have been there from the beginning. I would stop the corporate subsidies, such as the $26 billion that we gave to oil and gas alone last year. You know, Martin Luther King used to say, if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. If they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. I would also take back this ridiculous way that the U.S. government abdicated its right to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies to lower drug prices. I would say that we should look at the military budget, and every dollar that the military says they need for our legitimate security, they should get. But the money on top of that, which has to do just with short-term profitability for defense contractors, that goes away. And I also agree about the 3% tax on assets of billionaires and 2% on 50 million or more.
That's what's interesting, too, though, because we talk about, both sides here, and President Trump has been very careful about defending against socialism. We're going to hear that talk later this week. But when you kind of break out your plan versus maybe Senator Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, it's interesting to hear your take on capitalism, because you're not necessarily saying capitalism is a bad thing. You just want it to work for everybody else.
I want capitalism with a conscience. My argument is not in any way anti-capitalist. However, a virulent strain of capitalism has grabbed hold not only of capitalism but of our governmental functioning and our value system for the last 40 years. You know, something that a lot of people don't know is that when Milton Friedman and the whole Chicago school articulated trickle-down economics, saying that market forces unfettered by governmental regulation should be the bottom line organizing principle, Milton Friedman himself said, but we have to have a universal basic income to make it safe. So it's simply a matter of balancing all the forces so there's justice for everyone. The problem in America is not that some people can get rich. That's a good thing. The problem in America is that not enough people can get rich today. And I don't believe that the average person who creates wealth in this country wants to feel that they're doing so at the expense of other people having a shot at the opportunity.
And what about the corporate tax? And I apologize if you mentioned that in terms of things that you would roll back. I mean, don't you think the corporate tax is ultimately allowing companies to be more profitable here?
Yeah, but that's not necessarily good news if that money is not being shared with workers and other stakeholders. So the fact that it's allowing them to be more profitable, and then you look at the CEO class, before the 1980s, CEOs were not even able to be, it wasn't even legal for a CEO to be paid in stock options. So the fact that government is more, we're over this illusion that they're making more profit means it's going to trickle down to everybody else. I think after 40 years, the jury is over, is in on that.
So I want to go to another part of that economic plan that you have. So you say that you want to reduce and even in some instances eliminate student loan debt. This is obviously something that we've heard a lot of presidential candidates talk about. I'm wondering how much of a reduction in student loan debt. I care because I have student loan debt, right? So how much of a reduction? And for people that would have their student loan debt eliminated, who exactly?
Everybody, all of it. And
so all student loan debt gets eliminated under.
Let me tell you why. My idea of creating peace and prosperity comes from unleashing the creativity and the productivity of the American people. All public policy, both domestic and international, should be built around the core principle of what helps people thrive. That's where money comes from. Money comes from releasing people so that they can live their dreams. Then they're happier. How many young people, and not so young people, who are loaded by these college debts, want nothing more than to get into the game? Wish they had $2,500 in discretionary spending so that they could start their websites, et cetera. So I say the society is better off if you let people be who they want to be, do what they want to do, because what people want to do is create great things. So yes, I said, well, why are we're talking about a $1.5 trillion student loan debt? We're talking about a $2 trillion tax cut. I'm sorry, guys. I'll go for the kids. I'm going for the young people. I'm going, and others. You know, there are a lot of baby boomers who have that.
Yeah, no, it's not just. Everyone always talks about millennials.
It's terrible.
It's not just millennials.
We've got to unshackle people. That's where you get peace, and that's where you get prosperity.
So the rolling back of the TCJA, that tax cut that you were talking about, do you imagine that funding, you know, your Medicare for all, the elimination of all, does that, because as you just mentioned, $1.5 trillion student loan debt. So we're starting to add up a lot of things that are going to cost the American government a lot in terms of if we're going to enact it. So you mentioned rolling back the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that we recently saw, but that's not going to be able to cover universal health care and elimination of student debt and some of your other policies.
But that wasn't the only thing I said. I also said to stop the corporate subsidies. I'm into the $26 billion alone in 1 year to oil and gas. I talked about the government's ability to negotiate drug prices. I talked about military spending. I talked about the 3% on billionaire assets, and I talked about the 2% on the 50 million and more. You do those things, we're going to have some cash on hand.
Yeah, quite a bit of cash on hand. I want to ask you about this too, though.
Spend it in the right places. That's the problem.
Yeah, what I like about this too, though, is famously on the debate stage, is you weren't just talking about plans. You were also kind of appreciating the fact that you need to kind of make some sort of seismic shift in the way that we're talking about these problems and addressing them. It's not just the details that Americans care about, but it's how we enact these plans themselves. I mean, you've been very outspoken about shifting the mindset of America.
Somebody needs to be.
Yeah.
I always say, I don't say anything everybody I know isn't saying. I just say it when the microphone is on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I want to ask you this too, though, because when we talk about how many candidates are in the stables right now, and we're looking at it, right, and everyone's being asked, look, will you get behind, if it's not you, will you get behind the eventual 2020 Democratic candidate? And just hearing you talk about all these things, there are some overlap with other candidates. So I'd have to ask, if it's not going to be you, which candidate would you get behind to kind of enact some of these ideas you're talking about?
Well, I think given the challenge of replacing Donald Trump, I'll get behind any Democrat who's running. Mm-hmm. These times are way too serious for anything less than that. So whoever the Democrat is, I'm there.
Is there one other than you that you're talking about who's also talking about the same issues?
There are two or three that they're all lovely people, but there are two or three who I have a little more fun.
Can you name those two or three?
No, but I'm a left-wing progressive Democrat, so it becomes pretty obvious.
All right.
So as my last question to you, I have to ask you about some of the criticism that I've heard a lot of people talking about, because you're not a politician, and there's not everyone on that debate stage has been a politician. We've seen some celebrity candidates before. So I want to know how you respond to the criticism that you are running for president, not just because you want to be president of the United States, but also as a part of your own promotional push for your books or your brand.
Well, anybody who thinks that I'm doing this to sell books doesn't know how a book tour operates. This is not a book tour. Notice I haven't mentioned my book. Well, you actually did. But this is not the way to sell a book, I assure you.
Have you experienced an uptick in sales?
And it's interesting that the other candidates have books too. And isn't that funny? They're not criticized.
Have you experienced an uptick in sales since you...
No, I've experienced quite the opposite, actually, to be honest. Because I'm not out there talking about my book. That's how you sell a book.
Yeah, talking about very other issues that we're all facing right now, student loan debt being one of them that we are experiencing currently on this panel. Marianne Williamson. There you go. Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
It's been so great to have you on. And good luck with everything else. Hey investors, Zack Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.